If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello listeners, and welcome to this extra special bonus episode with author, activist, filmmaker and friend Bexy Cameron. Bexy grew up in the Children of God, sharing her experiences in the brilliant memoir Cult Following. I was so privileged to sit down with Bexy this month at CRIMECON in Glasgow and learn about her experiences on the big stage. As many listeners couldn't be there, we wanted to share this short segment recorded in a local Glasgow recording studio to give you an idea of what we offered at the CRIMECON UK event in partnership with CBS Reality. CRIMECON UK 2024 will take place in London on the 21st and 22nd of September. There are more ticket options than ever before, allowing you to curate your own special weekend and access the UK's biggest true crime event, and come and watch a talk like this one in person. There are payment plans and early bird discounts available, and of course you can use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, at the checkout and receive a special 10% discount from your ticket prices, making CRIMECON 2024 the most accessible so far. The content promises to be bigger and better than ever, and of course I will be there to meet each of you and grab a drink at the bar. So head on over to crimecon.co.uk and grab your tickets today. And now, here is Bexy Cameron.
Hello listeners, and welcome to this extra special episode coming to you from Glasgow's very swanky Big Light recording studio. A massive thank you to Brian, Fiona and the Big Light team for having us ahead of tomorrow's CRIMECON. And thank you to Nancy and her team at CRIMECON, to CBS Reality and Bonnier Books for allowing us this space to talk about a very important subject and making all of this work possible. But let's not delay any longer. Hello, Bexy, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure. So I am a documentary maker, an author. I'm also known as a sex cult girl, which is slightly less academic or fancy. But yeah, I was born into a cult called the Children of God, which was, fancily named as a sex cult. Shall we say that? One of those ones from the 70s where kind of anything went and then went really horribly wrong. So, I became a documentary maker mainly because I wanted to get into that topic, but into many more after that. And that's why I'm here today.
You are a woman that wears many hats. You've just completed a postgraduate course, which is a huge and excellent achievement. And you've also been doing work with Alexandra Stain and Rankin for the Family Survival Trust, I believe. How does that all come together?
Well, I mean, it's still coming together, but it's a really nice way of kind of looking at something which is really important but also quite dark, which is coercive control within cults. So what we're trying to do, and hopefully this is something that we're going to be pulling off, is we are working with the Family Survival Trust, as you said, and Rankin, one of the UK's most prolific photographers, to create an exhibition around this topic. So we're looking at people who joined cults, people who were born into them, and who've experienced all of these nuanced, weird, wonderful, horrific, traumatic experiences, and trying to understand what kind of joins them up, what divides us, what gives people that sense of other, and also what makes sense for people outside of the cult world as well. So how that will work in a physical sense is like photography that's never been seen before from childhoods in groups, understanding the rituals, that kind of thing, but it will culminate as an exhibition, and then hopefully what we're trying to do is actually get legislation changed in the UK for how cults and coercive control works within the UK, because I think it's really easy to get kind of distracted, if you like, by cults because they are so weird and sensationalist, and they have things like exorcisms and, bizarre beliefs and really bad outfits a lot of the time. So you can get distracted by that without actually realizing what is the thing at the nucleus of this that is actually really dangerous. And sometimes it's not the beliefs at all. It's just something much more simple, which is people trying to control you.
That sounds like such an incredible and exciting project. And I love how you've just talked about the nucleus of the issue. I talk about this sometimes in my lengthy episodes, interviews with people that are 2 to 3 hours long, which unfortunately we don't have today. And a lot of the time, the reason the episodes are so long is because to understand one major part of a person's experience, whether that be something like being branded or being physically imprisoned in a room or something, to understand that particular experience, you have to look at the whole picture and say, how did we get to this point? And I think that that's a really difficult thing to try and translate to wider society. And it's definitely a journey that I'm still on. And there are things that I am learning today about the children of God, despite reading multiple memoirs and interviewing various individuals who have had experiences within that group. So would you like to start us off with a sort of overview and timeline of the children of God?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult with the children of God because I think with a lot of cults, they become known for one thing. And I think if you look at the children of God, the thing that they're known for is the sexual practices and beliefs. So they had a practice called flirty fishing, which was basically sending the mums out to prostitute themselves. I don't like to use the words kind of sex worker. It doesn't feel right when it's more akin to human trafficking, which is where it was in that exploitative nature. So it doesn't have that same kind of sense of agency. And I know I'm kind of muddying the waters a little bit, but so those are the things that it's known for. It was known for sanctioning sex with children, paedophilia, and known for the prostitution of the mothers in the name of Jesus. So quite wild beliefs, if you like, and quite dangerous, deviant, exploitative beliefs. But how it started out, and in the same way that if we were going to look at coercive control in relationships, nobody starts out by dating a bastard, pardon my French. But you start out by dating somebody that's quite nice, and then slowly but surely it starts to become something else when you're in that kind of controlling relationship. And I think that cults are very similar. So my parents, when they joined in 1972, and it was, the Jesus freak revolution that was sweeping across the States. It was flower power. It was the riots. It was Vietnam War. Society was in a position where probably not too dissimilar for now. Everyone was kind of scared, and the politicians were lying to everyone, which no surprise. But it was a very fearful time, and a lot of people were wondering, how are we going to actually get through this? And is nuclear war just about to happen? And a lot of people were saying, stop the world, I want to get off. My parents were included with that. So I look at that time period and I see the cult that was then. And if you look at the photographs of early children of God, they all look really cool. They look like hipsters. They look like bands. They have long hair. They have quite, awesome outfits. They're all young. And you can imagine if you were of that time period, like David Berg was in his, I think, like late 50s, early 60s at the time, but he was sending his kids out to recruit. He started off by making peanut butter sandwiches in Huntington Beach and like recruiting that way, but he was doing it with the help of his teenage young adult children. So in that kind of, drawing kind of similarities from the kind of Epstein type thing where you use younger people to be your recruitment people. So I think that like at that time period, I can understand why people did join. It was a revolution for Jesus and it was dramatic and it was powerful. But how quickly it turned from that into something which was really dark and dangerous and deviant and wasn't about a revolution for Jesus and definitely wasn't just about, being counterculture. I mean, it was the space of like 4 years. So by the time that 1974 rolled around, he was already, like flirty fishing had already started in earnest. And I think that Child Bride, which was his big kind of decree on what you could, sexual abuse of children, which was being sanctioned by him and also documented by him. I mean, the Children of God essentially created a handbook for how to molest children, printed with photographs, and gave it to their followers. So my parents had been in the group for 4 years by that point. So you might sit and think to yourself, how did you get from being in this wild hippie cult to something where you were actually physically handed this book in black and white that I read as a child growing up and not understand how completely messed up this was. And when we talk about things like conditioning and brainwashing and stuff like that, and I don't like the term brainwashing because I think it kind of eradicates people of some of the agency that they might have had in situations and also of the responsibility that they should have had in situations. I think that conditioning is something that is really prevalent within cults. But on the day that happened, that this child bride document came out from David Berg, Moses David, whatever you want to call him, 2/3, or maybe it was a third actually, it might have been a third of the children of God left. So people did know. People did read it and go, this is too far. My parents weren't them, but people did know. So so you still have to think that there is a level of agency that is being, that's being carried out within groups in the same way that, a woman in a dangerous relationship might finally get to that point. They say it's like 7 times that it takes you to leave a controlling partner. And there's something that will make you go, this is too much. Maybe the abuse turns to the children, but something which turns the light on for you. So yeah, it's unfortunate it didn't work out like that for my parents, but I do find it quite shocking, even as someone who grew up in that group, to see how quickly that happened. It wasn't decades, it was a matter of 4 to 6 years.
And as somebody that grew up in that environment, there's still that need and want to understand how that happened. And I think that is something that individuals that haven't experienced cults want to do as well, want to understand, how do you go from A to B and why do people stay? But the really tricky thing, which you've mentioned in everything you just said so wonderfully, is the convoluted stuff that comes with moral injury, personal responsibility, and things like coercive control and conditioning. How much blame is to be put on first generation individuals and people that join certain groups, and how much of it should be looked at and inspected through the lens of coercive control. And I really appreciated the parts in your book where you were trying to work through all of those things and understand, your parents' decisions and why they did or didn't do certain things. So I don't know if there's a way you've managed to look at those two things, or whether you can't really pull them apart.
I mean, it's a really difficult thing because you want to look at things from multiple angles, but you have to accept the fact that you contain multitudes within you. I contained a child within me who was traumatized by my parents. I contain an adult within me who understands how the structures of cults work and how they break down family dynamics and how there is no family dynamic within the cult because the cult itself is the family. And once you start getting into the kind of muddy waters of that, you can always find a way to turn everybody into a victim within these groups. However, there is people who made the decision to be there, and there are people who were born into it, and there are people who are vulnerable, and there are people who were definitely, like I call my father, a career cultist, which I don't know if it's an actual term, but I kind of love it.
It is now.
Where, they essentially join something, they see a kind of real route to power within it and how they can kind of become quite, exploit it for themselves, where there are other people who are just being completely exploited within these groups. So I think that there are nuances. And, a lot of people say things like, well, your mother, for example, she was a victim. She was to a point. But there was also a point where she wasn't. There's a point where my parents became, and this also kind of complicates it, but my parents became the PR face for the children of God within the United Kingdom and Europe. So when I think about when people ask me big questions like, have you forgiven your parents? There is a part of me that it's not up to me to forgive two people who allowed the sexual abuse and physical abuse and psychological abuse of thousands of children within Europe and within Europe at that time to go under the radar. I can't forgive that because it's not for me to forgive. I can forgive them for what they specifically did to me. But their sins, if you like, if we're going to get biblical, which why not? We're here now. Their sins are so much greater than what happened to me. So I can be like, yeah, mom and dad, I forgive you. I would be saying that for myself, not for them, if we're being honest. But what they did and how they managed to put this kind of polite, kind of like British accented face onto a group that was doing horrific things, and they're still in it now. it becomes very muddy. When do we start calling somebody going from being a victim to being the exploiter? And we can look at this again. It's through the lenses that aren't anything to do with cults. We can look at it again, Epstein. We can look at it again, like R. Kelly. We can look at it across the board with people where the victims were also became the exploiters at some point. So it is complicated, but if we want to make it really simple, and I like to, the simple terms for me are always, if you're a child and you didn't have a choice and you didn't make the decision to be there, then you're the one that needs to be protected. If you as an adult had that autonomous moment and that decision and you gave yourself that, like, oh, that there was enlightenment and purpose, good for you. Believe what you want. But if a child is being harmed within the makings of your belief, then not on my watch.
Yeah.
No, ma'am. So for me, that's when it becomes a bit more simple. But yeah, it is a complicated topic for sure.
It's so complicated, and it's not binary. It's on like an ever-changing, shifting spectrum, and there's so many different things to contemplate on a individual case-to-case basis. And when you consider the magnitude of individuals that have had a cultic experience, and then you picture the magnitude of individuals that have brushed upon or experienced coercive control, it's kind of mind-blowing that this isn't more of a subject of discussion, which is why it's so great to hear that you're partnering with, I would say, the UK's leading charity on supporting individuals who have been victimised or exploited under the guise of coercive control, being the Family Survival Trust. And I don't want to focus too much on David Berg, but I do want to ask you a question. This is one of those big questions, do you believe that he had a goal of exploiting minors when he set up the Children of God? Because it happened so fast. He was a prolific paedophile. And I just always wonder, not did he know he was starting a cult? Or, did they know they were going to become a serial killer? I'm just wondering what you think personally on whether he always wanted to have access to vulnerable children.
So I think that, again, if we look at it from the big, big lens of cult leaders in general, and it's a kind of chicken and egg thing where, like, putting it into a really simple kind of analogy, if you like, or whatever, metaphor, I never get those two right. You look at somebody who goes into Hollywood, for example, and they might start out as a normal person, and then they are surrounded by people that are enablers and saying yes to them all the time. And then you end up with somebody like 20 years later that is unrecognizable as almost a human being because their morals, their sense of self have been so eroded that they become, people call them all kinds of horrible names because they just don't know how to be. Because as human beings, we are hardwired to need to have boundaries, and people saying no to us and calling us out on our stuff constantly. So, like, I think that you can see smaller versions of that happening all the time, whether it might be CEOs or pop stars, whatever. It happens all the time where you're like, how did you get like this? Like, when did you start like demanding X and Y and Z and treating people like they are dirt on your shoe? So you can see it happening all the time. However, I think that there are certain cult leaders that started out to do good and they became like that, where they became eroded and then they saw an opportunity, or money, power, sex corrupt. In any scenario, money, power, sex corrupt, especially with Western upbringing and the idea of the individual and the idea of I and me. We've all met, no offense to anyone listening, but like a white shaman who's like, spent like, 2 weeks in Peru and they've come back and they're trying to change the world. And you're like, that's super cool. But if you still have your like sense of ego that you grew up with and you don't have that kind of imbibed vibe and feeling of you just being a channel, then this could go very horribly wrong. And
it's kind of ironic that you say you want to heal the world.
Yeah, exactly that. It's like, you're a channel, bro, and that's it. But I digress. Like, I think with David Berg specifically, and I wanted to kind of just give an overview before going into him specifically, he abused his daughters long before he was in the Children of God. When he was a pastor and he had his first church, long before any, like the flower power and all the rest of it, he was kicked out of that church because of sexual deviancy. So this is a man that already had a predilection for that long before he started the Children of God. I think that what he saw was like, there were two things that happened that like his daughter talks about in her book. One was David Berg's mother died. And it was like his last kind of sense of like morals and to be a good person was kind of stripped away with that, as in like, right, this is my time to just go for it. They had a bit of a strange relationship, very codependent, etc. And I think that with he tried to transform himself when the 70s happened, the late 60s, 70s happened. He grew his hair, he changed his outfit. He spoke in different languages. He learned, he learned the vernacular of the hippies, and he really wanted to become this other person. And I think that he saw an avenue to get to what he wanted. And I think that he was biding his time to see how far he could push it and exploit it. I think his first port of call was to be seen as like a deity. And then after that, it was all the rest of it. And because he just kept being able to get away with more and more and more, and there was nothing that he couldn't get away with it. When you look at what he did and what he was capable of, the man did everything that you possibly pretty much can besides actually kill within the group. Everything else was pretty much there. So I think that he might not have had it as his grand, PowerPoint scheme or whatever, but it definitely was a means to an end to him for all of those types of corruption, if you like.
You mentioned something at the beginning of our talk about people whose lights are on and people whose lights aren't on. And I feel like your light was on from the beginning. In your book, Cult Following, which everybody should go and read because it's incredible, or you can listen to Bexy narrate it herself on Audible, which is great because you get singing in the round, you get scene sounds coming in, you get the American accents. It's great. It's all in there. And you always had this idea as a child, from what I gathered from your work, was that you knew it wasn't right and that something in the group was wrong, feeling certain things, thinking certain things, but then still being part of this group. And a lot of the difficult thoughts and feelings that children have expressed growing up in these environments, especially not having much access at all to the outside world. And your light stays on, you never fully buy into any of the stuff. I think there's a lot of residual sort of, if I break the rules, I might be harmed by, one of the aunties or uncles. But there's not really, you're biding your time until you can leave, basically.
Yeah, definitely after like the age of like 9, 10, for sure. It was like that. And I think a lot of that credit needs to go to kind of having older siblings. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the kind of Alice Miller psychology around like children and the benevolent witness, right? Where like the difference between somebody growing up who's in an abusive environment that can be completely normal-ish, let's not say completely, that's again a big term, and somebody that might turn out to have sociopathic tendencies or really violent or the rest of it, is having a benevolent witness in your corner, somebody that is telling you that what's happening to you isn't right. And if you don't have that, then you might start to believe that what's happening to you, whether it's psychological, physical, or sexual abuse, is actually okay. And we definitely had that in older siblings. And I think my older siblings had contact with my grandparents at the very beginning. And I feel like it was something that was passed down. I don't want to say through generations. It was only like, 6 years between us, 9 years between us. But it was something that was imbibed in then and then was given to us. And I'll be eternally grateful for that, because a lot of kids didn't have it and didn't realize that potentially what was happening wasn't okay. But I do think that children are actually born with that natural belief that to understand from just a primal perspective whether something is all right for them or not. Like, is this hug for me or is that hug for you? That doesn't mean we're still not going to trust the person that's harming us. We see that all the time with child abuse cases, where kids are still completely trusting a parent that's putting cigarettes out on them, for example, and stuff like that. So there's a duality for sure. There's a double bind to it for sure. But yeah, I think for me, having like my brothers and sisters around me that, I'm 1 of 12, and we were this pack that protected each other and loved each other, and we had each other's back all the time, and we, that we always knew that it wasn't us versus them. It wasn't like, even in an environment where they were trying to break down the family, and if you've read the book and turn us against each other and like constantly having us grass on each other, snitch on each other, whatever the word you want to use is, and how somehow we still always knew that the love was there. And it's still there today. I mean, I've got 8 siblings that live in London, and we meet up all the time. We talk probably every 5 minutes, and we still play all the cult games that we grew up on, which most of the time it's around one thing, which will be like a potato, since that's all we had to create games out of. And trust me, you can make a lot of games out of a singular potato. Don't ask where they're put, but
potatoes are very versatile.
They're very, very versatile. But honestly, like, so I did kind of see it in lots of ways for what it was, but I did also have breakdowns when I was a child. Like, I think I was maybe 10 years old when I actually thought that I was losing my mind and going mad, because I was just like, I've got to give in to this. I've got to give in to this world that I'm in. If I don't, everyone else has, especially at that point, because I'd been on silence restriction. I'd been put on this discipline, which was me being silent for 11 months. So just under a year. I wasn't allowed to look at anyone or communicate with my hands, wasn't allowed to talk to anybody except for one person who was like the leader, Mary Malaysia, of our of the group at that point. So at that point, I really did lose my mind, to the point where I was like, I've got to give in, and I need to figure out a way to just start towing the line, because I can't continue to fight against this. I mean, I was a baby when you think about it like that. That's a kid. It's not even a teenager. So there were points when I look back that were really, really scary, and I did lose my way, because how could I not? I didn't have enough outside contact or understanding to realize that what I was essentially being sold was a big, giant, steaming pile of crap.
And I love the parts where you have those moments of clarity and you think, this is exactly what you just said it was. This is a load of horse shit. And it comes through occasionally, and a tiny little rebellious little Bexy's voice coming through through the narrative of the book as well. And the work that you've done around documentary making, filmmaking, since your escape and exit from the Children of God, has taken on a role of understanding, discovering, investigation work into various other cults. I wonder if you feel like that's your calling, if you feel, well, not in a religious sense, but more so, is this what you have fallen into and feel like you should be doing? Or is it something that people keep coming to you saying, Bexy, we need you on this?
It's an interesting one, actually, because like when I first left, I left when I was 15, and when I only started doing this work and this kind of investigative stuff because I spent the first 10 years of being out of the Children of God completely pretending it hadn't happened and never speaking about it. And I had invented this entire other kind of like reality for myself, and I abandoned it, and nobody knew. None of my friends knew. Like by the time I was 27 years old, and I was, I was already the creative director. I was like running around, getting wasted the whole time, living what I thought was a really good life. And it's the minute I would go to sleep or close my eyes, I was literally right back in the cult. I was right back at the fires of Armageddon, and I could not escape it. And it was only because of the fact that I knew that I couldn't shake it off that I actually had to start facing it. So I think that, there's that saying like, deal with your shit before your shit deals with you. And it was really a case of that, where I was like, I didn't want to get into it. And I definitely did not want to get into my parents and that whole mess and be like, oh, let's dig around in the past. If I could have left it and never seen it again, that would have been amazing. But just stuff doesn't work out like that. Trauma that isn't dealt with turns into some pretty hideous stuff. So I started just by trying to understand a bit more about myself to begin with. Like, why did I leave? What were the big moments for me? And then it was like, actually, I don't want to look at my parents, and I don't want to look at the Children of God. Like, I didn't want to look at any of that because it was my life. I knew enough about it. But I was like, maybe I can understand them through other people, which a lot of people at the time were like, why would you do that? It's clear that the route is A to B. And I was like, no, I need to do the rest of the alphabet first, and then I'll come back to that. Potentially never, hopefully never. So that's why I, went to the States, bought a truck, lived in this truck, and I did this over 4 years, joined 10 cults. And during that time, I was like living in everything from like Armageddonist cults to, the ones to like trying to get into ones that channel aliens to, people that think they can heal you with their penis, which I think is probably most cult leaders,
Yeah.
whether they say that or not. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that one. But yeah, so I really just wanted to understand what it was that combined them, and people at the time were like, you're trying to re-traumatize yourself. And I didn't believe that, but of course I did actually re-traumatize myself in lots of ways. But I also did have 15 years worth of being in a cult that was actually really good experience for me, being able to split into two entirely different people, one external, one internal, which I know we all do. We all experience things in multiple versions of ourselves in each second that we're alive. But to have that as kind of an experience, I was worried about myself before I went. And actually, once I was out there, I realized that I was okay, but it didn't make it easy and it didn't make it any less scary, but it did make it feel worthwhile to do what I was doing. And I think when I look back on it, like, it's really helped me understand. But one of the biggest things that I would say that I've kind of gained out of it is I had like some of the kids that I met when I was in Rose Creek who were, 8, 10, 12 at the time, get in touch with me. Was it last year? Maybe last year, like just one of them Instagrammed me and they were
Wow.
like, your visit, and like, this is their words, I'm not going to try and take responsibility, but they were like, your visit has kind of changed the trajectory of our lives, because when you came and stayed with us, our mom was going, why are we being told to change our children's behavior because there's essentially a reporter here, a documentary maker here, and they were pretending to do school, and they were pretending like that they had this entirely different life. And she saw this facade, and we talked about a light switching on, and that was her moment where her light switched on. And these kids said to me that after we left, they'd like broken into one of the adults' offices and got on their computer and tried to contact us. And there was this whole thing where they were like, I was in bits in my living room, like with Paz, my husband, and I was just like talking to her on Instagram, and she was just like, with like, my mom left, she started up her own company. There's
my
five
gosh.
kids. My mom left, she started up her own company. I'm doing my GED, this, that, and the other. And I was just bawling my eyes out, just being like, and I'm not saying that she wouldn't have had that moment if we weren't there. I cannot take responsibility for what that woman has done, which I think is actually amazing. Like, she left her husband, she was in a really vulnerable position. I mean, she had little kids, 5 of them, all, and to go out and just be like, no, not anymore. I'm gonna, take them all out. I mean, honestly, like, I get goosebumps thinking about it now, just because, that for me was one of those moments where I was like, if that is the only thing that's happened because of this journey, then it was worth it. Like,
Yeah.
completely worth it.
Absolutely. That is such an incredible and really kind of emotional, invoking story. I can't imagine how it must have felt for you to receive those Instagram messages. And I think it just goes to show that the work that is happening around cult awareness and cult education, it's making waves, it's making changes. More of it needs to happen. We've got incredible voices at the forefront of that, Bexy being one of them. And I am so thankful for you coming to join me this weekend to speak to people about the subject of cults, coercive control, and hopefully we sell out all the copies of your book. And then loads of people that are listening now head over to Audible and get an ebook version. So before we finish today, I just wanted to say again, a massive thank you to Brian and Fiona for letting us use this space at the Big Light Studios. Very swanky.
Oh,
here,
it's so fancy,
isn't it? I've never heard myself like this before.
I know.
So...
I'm normally recording under a duvet, so this is really fancy.
And tomorrow we will be on the big stage speaking to everybody in a bit more detail about Bexy's experiences, your life, your work, your documentary, your book, and all the creative ventures that you've been on and will continue to be on far past our conversation tomorrow. I am so excited for this weekend.
Oh, thank you. So am I. Thanks, Casey.
That is the end of this week's bonus episode with Bexy Cameron, survivor of the Children of God. To find a copy of Bexy's memoir Cult Following, you can follow the links in the episode description. For tickets to CrimeCon UK 2024, you can also follow the links in the episode description. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.